Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm celebrating 1,000 subscribers. It's finally happened. Thank you so much for your support and all your comments and all your wonderful feedback over this. It's 18 months this channel's been going. You know what, right? I actually got 1k subscribers on Sunday night and then some sod unsubscribed. So I had to delay this celebratory video. Honestly, this country. But anyway, I've finally got 1,000 subscribers now, so I thought I'd do a little series of celebratory videos, and this is the first one. Now, as you can see, I collect a lot of DVDs and Blu-rays, and if you collect a lot of discs over the years, you find in your collection really odd things turn up, sort of slightly embarrassing things, but that you collected at some point. And what I thought I'd do today is introduce you to sort of 12 rather embarrassing items in my collection. So, for example, if some very serious cinephile came in and was looking through my collection, looking at the Antonionis and the Tarkovskis and the Bellatar and was nodding away, and then they saw, what is this? Well, those are the videos I'm going to present to you today. Things like, for example, this Goth Cruise. That's right. It's a film about some goths going on a cruise in Bermuda. Goths. Honestly, I haven't made this up. I haven't mocked this up. This is a real film. I'm serious. And the thing is, right, I have no idea how this got in my collection. I never bought the thing. I don't know if someone gave it to me. I got it free. It's just in my collection. I don't know where it came from. It's a bit spooky. I thought it might be quite amusing if I had the technical know-how right, that we could do one of those watch-alongs where we could. I've never watched it never watched it once in my life. We could all watch it together and see what it's like, and have little comments as we watch these goths go on a cruise. Who wants to watch that? What next? Punks on a cruise? New romantics on a cruise? Very, very strange indeed. I've also got this, guys. Tom Baker's Ultimate Sci-Fi Quiz. I mean, that's the classic Christmas present, in it. Someone gives you that because they know you like Doctor Who, they know you like Tom Baker. So you get this kind of pub quiz about sci-fi. I have actually played it. That's how sad I am. It's just terrible. It's just general knowledge questions about Star Trek or Star Wars, or 2001: A Space Odyssey. And Tom comes on every so often and reads the question out. Very, very strange indeed. But there it is. It's in my collection. Also in my collection is Ghostwatch. Yes, I actually bought this. For those of you who don't know what Ghostwatch is, right, in the 1990s, the BBC did a spoof. They often did these kind of spoofs for April Fool's Day. The famous one was they did a news report about spaghetti growing on trees. This was in the days before, foreign cuisine was popular in Britain. And some people believed it. It went out on a news programme called Panorama, and people believed in it. And every so often they would do these spoofs. Now, in the early 90s, they did this one, and they presented it like it was a live news programme. And the idea of the programme was they were transmitting from a haunted house somewhere in London, and they were going to go through the night watching any events in this house. And so it was all set up like a sort of live news broadcast. And Michael Parkinson, who was a famous presenter and interviewer at the time, was presenting it from the studio. And then Sarah Green and Mike Smith, who were married at the time, they were famous children's presenters. They were out in this location interviewing the family who lived in this haunted house and all this stuff. And as things go on, weird things start happening. And if you look carefully, you see this guy at the back of the room as the camera just pans, there's someone there. Right. It's totally ridiculous. And quite badly done, actually. And then basically the events ramp up, and you realise it's a narrative. And suddenly the whole house sort of explodes in activity. The crew, they lose contact with the crew, and the whole world starts to end, and it goes really apocalyptic. Actually, they'd already spoilt it, right? Because in the Radio Times, the TV listings magazine that week, they'd actually listed it as a drama. They actually felt that they had to do this because otherwise they'd be tricking the public. So stupid. So they actually gave the game away before it even went on air. But a lot of people were still convinced by it. Looking back, it really isn't very good. It's amusing to see Michael Parkinson taking part in such a project. But it's not very good. But I had to buy it anyway. because I love this kind of thing. Now, I think if a serious cinephile person looked at my collection, the video that they'd most snort at is this one. Benny Hill, Double Helpings. You remember Benny Hill? Yeah, Benny Hill, of course, was a famous comedian, very famous, very popular comedian in Britain and also in the United States, actually. And it's kind of saucy seaside postcard humour. You know, it was all that stuff, and him chasing young women around parks in various states of undress. And this was, I liked it, you know, Benny Hill was really the first victim of woke. All those years ago in the 1980s, the first wave of what we now call woke broke on British shores, and the first sacrificial victim was Benny Hill. His comedy was considered very sexist and offensive, and he basically got cancelled. He'd had the biggest show on ITV for years, and then he got stuffed, and it just stopped. They just stopped making it. And the thing is, we used to watch this as a family, and I used to giggle along to those silent movie sequences where he takes off Chaplin and Buster Keaton, right? I used to think they were very funny. And I saw this one day in a bargain basement DVD store, and I just thought, it was only about £3. I thought, I'll just get it out and see what I think of it now, you know. What do I make of it as an adult? And a lot of it is very, very dated and not very funny. I still like the silent comedy sequences. Some of the gags in them are brilliantly set up and quite funny. I don't find it offensive, partly because I thought the joke was always on Benny Hill and the other old guys, that they were old guys chasing young women around. I thought the joke was on them, but of course now the sexism of it has come to the forefront. But I don't really find it offensive. I just find it silly and innocent and daft, really. So that's Benny Hill, and I keep it in my collection, and I even put it here, look, right there, in every single one of my videos, as a kind of act of defiance. So there you go. I'm often buying, you know, DVDs and videos of things I used to love when I was a kid to sort of revisit them. And this is why this ends up in my collection. The original SpiderMan cartoon. This was originally made in the 60s in America, but it was repeated on Saturday mornings. I think was it in Tiswas or Multicoloured Swap Shop? I can't remember. They used to repeat it on Saturday mornings, and I loved it. I loved the music. I loved the look of it. It was quite atmospheric, I thought, you know. And it's along with that original theme song, you know, Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can, spins his web. I want to say adjusts his flies, but that's not the next line, is it? I can't remember what the next line is, but it's that famous song anyway. I used to love this, and what I like about this cartoon is it was so cheap. I never realised when I was a kid. But you know the scenes where Spidey is flying across New York or wherever he lives, and he's got his web and he's going shh, 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 and then he flies forward into the camera. It's the same shot every single episode. They must have saved a fortune making this show. It's just the same sequence repeated over and over again with this great music. I loved it. So I actually bought it on DVD to see whether I liked it again, and I've not watched a single episode yet. Yeah. Oh well. Now, here I am doing all these videos about Kiarostami and Antonioni and Kubrick. What do you think was the first DVD in my collection? Well, it was, of course, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was actually bought for me by a friend to encourage me to get a DVD player. That's the kind of friends I have. Well, there is a story about this, because in the 90s, what had happened was the 70s had been a big era of filmmakers trying to push the envelope in terms of sex and violence. And a lot of films fell foul of the British censor. Incidentally, the recent film Poor Things, which has just been nominated for an Oscar, is actually censored in Britain. I don't know if you know this. There's a scene where two boys watch her have sex. It's been cut in Britain. It's actually censored. So the censors are still there. They are still working overtime. But in the 70s, they really went to town. And this was one of the movies that was affected. It was effectively banned, or certainly wasn't shown on television anyway. And in the 90s, the censorship rules relaxed. And I was just getting into film at the time. So I devoured them. You know, I went to see Straw Dogs, Eye Knock Corridor, Salo. And I went to see with a friend, this friend who bought me the DVD, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And this was so exciting for us to watch this film. And I thought it was great. Some of you may not like gory violence or horror. But if you do and you've never watched this film, you'll be surprised how good it is. It's a really, Tobe Hooper, the director, knew what he was doing. It's a very well-made movie. And what I like about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is it's the purest horror film. About halfway through, there's this gang of teenagers picked off by these weirdos out in the middle of nowhere. And there's only one of them left, this young girl. And basically she spends the last 25 minutes of the film just screaming in absolute terror. It's just this really pure horror film that gets rid of narrative, it gets rid of all that clutter, and just goes for absolute relentless hysteria. And I think that's quite admirable. And the other thing I like about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is it's very funny. If you've got a sick sense of humour like me, it's a brilliant satire of the American family. And there's this great scene where they all sit down to dinner, these cannibals. And they've got the young surviving teenager at the end of the table. And they bring down Grandpa. And Grandpa's like this desiccated corpse. He looks like he died 5 years ago. And they sit him down at the table. And so they get the young woman and they bend her head over a bucket and they give Grandpa a hammer and they say, "Go on, Grandpa, go on." So he's supposed to hit the girl over the head like a sort of ritual slaughter of a beast sort of thing. And he's so weak that he keeps dropping the hammer in the bucket. And these guys, the team's going, "Go on, Grandpa, you can do it, Grandpa." I thought that scene was hilarious. I know, I need help, right? I'm getting therapy. But if you've got a blackly comic sense of humour like me, it's very, very funny. It's very dark. And I think it's a great movie, and it did kind of encourage me to keep going with my DVD collection. So thank you to that friend all those years ago. Talking of really hardcore horror movies for really sick people, Cannibal Holocaust, directed by Ruggero Deodato. This was one of those movies, in the early 80s, there was a phrase in Britain, video nasties. And this was a big scare in Britain. Are your kids watching video nasties? Are they watching I Spit on Your Grave and Driller Killer and what was it, SS Death Camp, I think it was called. Really, really violent, gory horror movies. And this was one of the notorious titles, Cannibal Holocaust. And I didn't ever watch this until a few years ago. And I'd been told that it was really horrible, and there were particularly very grim scenes of animal killing. There's a scene where a lovely big turtle is actually killed live on screen. It's very hard to watch. And it's pretty brutal. There's lots of rape and violence and murder. But what I found to my amazement was it's actually quite a good film. It's quite well made. It's quite intelligent. Years before the Blair Witch Project and the whole sort of found footage movie, this got there first. Right, so what it is, these guys, this young group of documentarists, so-called, have gone into the jungle to find a lost tribe of the Amazon, right? And their footage is found. And the movie starts with this other, more serious documentary team trying to find them. And then we go back, and the movie splits, and then we start watching the footage of these young people. And we realise that actually these young people were not killed by cannibals, some horrible tribe in the jungle. Actually, they intimidated the tribe and actually scared them and terrorised them. And that's why the tribe retaliated and killed them. So it's a film that's got quite a savage twist. It's got a sort of political or ideological twist in it. It's leeringly exploitative. It's horribly violent. But it's kind of compelling. It's a good test, really, of the medium of art, that you can make something that is repellent and horrible, but is also quite brilliant in its own way. Best of it all is the wonderful soundtrack by Riz Ortolani, which I've got on CD, which is actually a really great soundtrack. It's almost kind of moving, if you've never heard it. So Cannibal Holocaust, those of you who are strong of stomach should give it a try. Now, from the very first days of having a DVD player, I knew I needed a multi-region player. I wasn't just going to settle for the films that are available in the UK, because the UK God, there's so much that's not available. It's disgusting, right? So I knew I needed a multi-region player. I knew I needed to be able to buy videos from the US and from other parts of the world. What do you think was the first video I forked out a fortune for to buy from the US? Because buying DVDs from the US has always been expensive, even more expensive now. The import fees are crazy. What do you think was the first video? A Criterion of Antonioni or of Fellini? Perhaps, a Criterion of, someone like Bellatar or Kiarostami or Josselani, someone very obscure. No, my friends, it wasn't. I bought The Man Who Haunted Himself. Yes, The Man Who Haunted Himself. You know. Come on, don't pretend you don't. Roger Moore's greatest film. His favourite film of all the films he ever made. His best performance. That's right, Roger Moore did give a good performance. You may not know this film. It's a 1970 British horror movie which has got its own cult in Britain, and I absolutely love it. I think it was based on an old Alfred Hitchcock Presents story, I'm not quite sure. But basically what happens is, it's about this boring London stockbroker played by Roger Moore. And he's got this boring middle-class life. And he even keeps a mistress, in London. And one day, he suddenly has this desire to drive his car incredibly fast, as we all do. And he crashes the car. And when he's in the operating theatre, there's an extra blip appears, right? And then it disappears again. But then when he goes back to his life, he finds that people keep saying they've just met him. Or he seems to find evidence that he's been there, like a cigar that's just lit. And he realises he's being haunted by another Roger Moore. And what I like about this movie is, right, this story's been done a few times, and usually a kind of demonic other, figure comes into their life and spoils their life. There was a Bruce Willis episode in Twilight Zone that did this. But in this film, the new Roger Moore is a better Roger Moore. He's nicer, he's more charming, he's sexier, he's more adept, he's more skillful. And slowly, he pushes the other Roger Moore out. Now, I first saw this film as a teenager, and I was a very shy, timid, angsty kind of teenager. And this film made a big impression on me, because I thought, hey, this isn't fair. Why does the sexy, clever guy win? What's wrong with the crappy Roger Moore, who's a bit boring? He's got a right to live as well. He made a very deep impression on teenage Mike. And that's one of the reasons this film has stayed with me. I also love the score by Michael J. Lewis, which is great fun. So if you've never seen The Man Who Haunted Himself, Roger Moore really believed in this film. It was close to his heart, just like, The Wicker Man was close to Christopher Lee's heart. It's well worth trying, and I'm glad I forked out for this so much money for it to get it from the US. Another horror film I had to fork out for. Trilogy of Terror. You've seen it. If you're my generation or older, you know what I'm talking about. This was one of the great TV movies of the 70s. Karen Black, very beautiful actress who was in 5 Easy Pieces. She was in a whole suite, load of 70s American movies. But she was slumming it here in a TV movie in the mid-70s. In this trilogy, this portmanteau film of horror stories. Now, the first two stories are crap. They're absolutely crap. And the first one is very, very sexist, even by 70s terms. But the last one is the one that everyone remembers. Basically, Karen Black buys this devil doll, this kind of African devil doll. And it has a little chain around its neck. And if the chain falls off, the doll comes to life. And it's hilarious. The whole thing is set in her apartment at night. And there's this devil doll, and it's got this big knife like this, and it goes blah, 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 and it's running around, jumping over settees and things, trying to attack her. And there's one brilliant scene where she puts it in this little briefcase, and it goes blah, 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 and you see this little knife cutting through the case. It's fantastic. And then there's the brilliant ending, where she calls her boyfriend to come and have dinner with her. And then you cut back to her, and she's on the kitchen floor, and she's got this great big knife, and she's got the great big grin that the doll has on its face, and she's waiting to kill him. That's one of the images that's imprinted on my mind from a kid. My parents let me stay up and watch it. They indulged me, and I've never forgotten it. So I had to have this movie in my collection. I tell you now, it's crap. It is so bad. But I love it so. So, Trilogy of Terror for pure horror cult fans. See, another horror thing that I remember from when I was a kid that I loved, it came out when I was about 8, 79, 80, was Hammer House of Horror. Hammer was, on its uppers by the time it made this. The golden days had gone a long time ago. The films had stopped being made, and this was their last-ditch attempt. And they went into TV. They only made one season, and when you watch it, you know why. It is awful. Oh my God. I mean, I remembered it fondly from when I was a kid, right? My parents used to let me watch it. You remember Hammer House of Horror? It's the one where, that pipe comes out the wall and sprays blood all over those kids. You remember. And the hitchhiker with the nail that goes down the neck, that woman's cheek. You remember that. And don't tell me you don't remember Denholm Elliott in the phone box with the naked lady. Yes, you do. You watched it the same as I did. Denholm Elliott with the naked lady. That actually is the best episode. That's the one that stands up the best. The other episodes are terrible. They are so bad. And it shows why Hammer lost its place in the horror market. I mean, this is the epitome of kind of leering, blood and boobs. It's just so gratuitous. And it's so cheaply made. Like, it's clear that they only had one location, which is where the Hammer Studios itself, which was in this beautiful old house in Bray. And every single episode is set there. They just keep shooting the house from different angles. It's terrible. And there's so many bad episodes. The Suzanne Danielle episode, have you seen that one? Which is just an excuse to watch Suzanne Danielle in various lurid outfits, killing men with this big dagger. And the werewolf episode is terrible. It's so awful. One thing that amuses me about Hammer House of Horror is the opening credits. They're supposed to be quite spooky and to lure you into this program, right? They're hilarious. So what it is, you've got this spooky house at night, which is Bray Studios, right? Anyway, you've got this spooky house and there's some ramparts, right? And this bloke turns up on the ramparts. I think he's supposed to be Dracula, but it actually looks like they've got some bloke, they've gone, Terry, can you go up on that rampart, mate, and just walk around a bit? Oh, yeah, all right, yeah. And they put a cloak on Terry, and Terry's just walking around in the night and looking over the rampart at the view. It's the most unscariest thing you've ever seen. And then later on in the end credits, there's a window, a lighted window, right? And you see Terry, he's still got his cloak on, and he walks past with a candle, Oh, is that right? Am I doing it right, Rog? Yeah, okay, yeah. And it's just ridiculous. It's the stupidest thing you've ever seen. But I love it so. So yeah, Hammer House of Horror. Usually on this channel I give recommendations. This is one to avoid. If you have memories of it like I do when I was a child, don't go back. Don't go back. Now, something a bit different, a bit art housey. Valley of Love. I'm putting it out there, right? I think I might be the only person in the world who likes this film. I don't know any other cinephile. I don't know many people who've seen it, let alone like it. In France, it was trumpeted as the comeback film, reuniting Isabelle Huppert and Gérard Depardieu, two of the greatest actors of their generation. Of course, Depardieu is now in all sorts of trouble. He's been accused of all sorts of sexual assault. But they paired them up again. And it's just the two of them, really. It's a two-hander in this movie. It's a very, very strange movie. Basically, their son committed suicide 6 years ago. And he gave them a message before he died to 6 years from my death to be at this motel in sort of Death Valley in America. And you will meet me again, right? So what you're watching is Isabelle Huppert and Gérard Depardieu just wandering around this motel in America. Gérard Depardieu is sweating like crazy. He's a big guy now, and he just sweats through the entire movie. And it's just these awkward scenes between him and Isabelle Huppert sort of not really getting on very well. And then sort of supernatural stuff starts happening. It's kind of like a ghost story. I really like it. I like it just because it's so odd. I mean, it's not a great movie. In fact, it's a very stupid movie. But it was so strange that I kind of fell in love with it. I liked just the sheer madness of it. I liked the way that the director was just teasing the audience, really, and enjoying watching Depardieu and Isabelle Huppert do their stuff. So if there's anyone else out there who likes this movie, please let me know in the comments below. It'd be nice to know that I'm not the only person in the universe who likes something. And finally, this also is in my collection. 2 Robin Hood films by Hammer. Hammer made 3 Robin Hood films, actually, in the 50s and 60s. They're not very well remembered because they're not very good. So why have I bought this big box set of them? Well, I bought it because I grew up in Nottingham, and I grew up with the Robin Hood myths, and I get really sick and tired of the crappy way that film and television has treated Robin Hood over the years. They never get Robin Hood right. They never get it right. First of all, he's from Nottingham. You'd be forgiven for getting that. They never do Notts accents. They never film it in Nottingham. Not that there's much of Sherwood Forest left, but it's Nottingham. Also, Robin is working class. He's a working class man who's stealing from the toffs to give to the poor. You don't see that anymore. He's always some sort of aristocrat who's been deposed, and he's trying to get his seat back, or he's fighting the king's men. No, it's a local story. It's a local working class man, a yeoman, against the Sheriff of Nottingham. It's a local story of a bad boy going good, And to me, the reason why I bought these films is not because they're very good, because they ain't. They're pretty basic, but they're traditional. There's no modernising, there's no PC readdressing of issues. It's just men in green tights running around English woods fighting each other with sword fights and crossbows. That's what I want, And it's got Peter Cushing as the Sheriff of Nottingham, and he's very good. That's the kind of thing I like. Niall McGuinness is Friar Tuck. It's very sweet and innocent, which is what the Robin Hood tales should be, I think. And so, if you just want a bit of nostalgia, go back to the boyish, tales of the Merry Men and Little John and Will Scarlet and Maid Marian. I recommend these 2 films. They're a lot of fun. So those are some offbeat, slightly embarrassing DVDs in my collection. I'd love to know what embarrassing DVDs you've got in your own collection. And I'll be publishing another 1,000 subscribers celebratory video soon. Thanks very much.